But another way to think about this challenge would be in terms of the war for talent. And if you look at this quote, it says, if you exclude 50% of the talent pool, and I would say not just exclude, but also just undervalue the contributions of 50% of the talent pool, it's no wonder you find yourself in a war for talent. And in this day and age, with the rapidly changing economy, with digitization, with globalization, and all these things, the war for talent is real. But the other thing I should mention about this quote is that this is from someone who's an executive director for the Washington State Investment Board. This is someone who's investing millions of dollars in pension money in companies. And what this person is saying is that we want the companies we invest in to pay attention to gender equality. And if they don't, we're actually going to move our investment dollars. So if companies want to have full access to the capital markets, they also have to think about gender equality. So these are some ways of thinking about the importance of the business imperative. And in fact, many companies have thought quite hard about this and have tried and made efforts. And yet what we know from those efforts is that, and we know this from research and we know this from the experience of just looking around at any organization in which we participate, that these efforts have not necessarily worked. And in fact, they have not only not worked, many of the efforts that organizations undertake, probably most famously implicit bias training, which probably many people here have participated in, often that can not only not work, but it can backfire in organizations. And we see this backlash happening throughout the economy, from Silicon Valley to corporate leadership, where recent surveys suggest that a sizable minority, maybe upwards of 40% of men in the corporate world, believe that we are spending too much time thinking about diversity and gender equality. And so we know that from the research, that the reason that these efforts haven't worked is in part because organizations have not invested in the full suite of activities that are really necessary beyond just training here or there in order to make progress. So what would that investment look like? I'll give you the example of Salesforce.com. This is an organization where the CEO made the decision that he was no longer going to tolerate the gender wage gap. We know that the gender wage gap exists in all sorts of places across the economy, depending upon which country you look at. It's upwards of 20 cents on the dollar, and if you look at women of color, it's even stronger. And what he said was, we want to close that wage gap. So they did the analysis, and they figured out that there were substantial wage gaps even within their company, and so he spent $3 million equalizing pays to make sure that men and women were paid equally. A year later, they go through the exercise again, and because of all the kinds of natural biases that creep into our processes for hiring, promotion, and evaluation, the gender wage gap had appeared again, and he spent another $3 million actually closing it. So this is what we mean by investment. What we mean is real money, real time, real effort in making this change. And I should note that that investment should also be thought of on a personal level. So this is a quote from Charles Blow in a recent op-ed that he did in the New York Times, and he said, if you are not actively working to dismantle it, and by it he means discrimination and gender inequality, you are supporting it. It is not sufficient to simply say to not be sexist yourself. Every man must become a feminist. And he said every man must work as hard as every woman to elevate gender equality and to eliminate gendered violence. And so what he's saying is that we all have a role ourselves. People of all genders have their own role to play in terms of making their own personal investments in their time, in their political and social capital, in their resources in order to make this happen.